Dark Souls, Souls-likes, I'm just trying to fish for God's sake. Nioh, one of the most demanding new series loosed into the broader gaming ecosystem by Team Ninja like a shrieking plague of feral bats. You gear up, obliterate, like peasants and shit, and kill demons. It hit the PS4 in 2017 and Windows later on. It's a relatively young franchise. Or so it seems. Nioh's development stretches back to 2004 with intentions to launch on PS3 as part of an enormous multimedia project based on an unfinished script by Akira Kurosawa, the legendary Japanese filmmaker. That project lit up like Hinoji Temple, if you catch my drift, and development proper for the revamped New Age Souls-like Nioh began in 2014. Is that like Oni? Like an inverse of Oni? Oh, two Diva Kings. Well, okay then. It is pretty peculiar, I think, to be Team Ninja, developer of basically my favorite set of mechanics in a video game skin, Ninja Gaiden, and to attempt producing a game based on the work of a famous filmmaker, so art, and then pop out the other end with directly transposed Dark Souls elements in your new IP. Maybe they knew it'd sell better that way. People have been asking me to cover Nioh for a while, especially because I made a tepid and embarrassing video years ago when I didn't know how to do YouTube, or game review, or anything. So watch the parade, shout it from the rooftops, trumpets and clowns, confetti and streamers, KBash was wrong! But not completely.
I was just looking!
It's a weird pair of games, and they're both great, but they're also really interesting to dig into and discuss in depth. How do you make a pair of games that prioritize, aggressively even, just about everything I hate in game design, and still make them fun? You made ball-busting fun. Consider what you've done! For the record, I'm on the PC version of Nioh 1's Remastered Edition and the latest version of Nioh 2, also on PC. The versions a newcomer might play today. And thanks to the way games are patched now, changed in a blink, some of this might not make sense to you. So if I have to read another comment about your play experience differing, I'm gonna politely ask you to make the video, you goddamn you coward, you rube, you ultramaroon. I hate Nioh! I hate Nioh! I don't want to play Nioh anymore! I don't want to play Nioh! Oh hey, Nioh 1 disc. What's new? Collecting dust as usual.
Hey, nice skit. D-bag, get on with the video.
What's so special about this anyway? Nioh is f***ed up. Can someone get Nioh some therapy? Can I get some therapy? What's my healthcare plan? Despite more or less copying the Cliff's Notes of Soul's design, Nioh is going for a different vibe completely, or stumbling to capture the vibe, but I like to be charitable. I can't get upset that anyone would call it a Souls-like. It's like Souls, a punishing action game popping with build-focused RPG systems, limited heals. When you die, you drop accumulated leveling experience and get one chance to pick it up on rebirth. But the make is in the minutia. Nioh has different values. Nioh has mildly suspect policy propositions, but ignore that. Spilled ink aside, Nioh's a game where you run around in 3D space killing people, powering up, and tackling bosses until you've hit credits. It's more complex than your typical Souls title, and that's probably going to be where you fall in love or fall off completely. When I first reviewed Nioh in my first year of making videos, I dropped the ball. I didn't know how to write about games. I didn't know what was appropriate for a review. I wasn't used to hardcore action games at all. I couldn't handle Nioh. It was too much woman for me. One credit scroll later, and now I think the old video got things partially right. Regardless of whining, Nioh has an axe to grind and a player to kill. It's punishing, generally unforgiving, and harder to cheese than your typical Souls game. But as I pushed through to the end, I started to come around. Nioh can be miserable and annoying. Openly frustrating, but deeply engaging and rewarding as well. So what's it all about? It's the story of William Adams, a man locked up in the Tower of London whose guardian spirit, this fairy thing, is stolen by a rogue man who pisses off to Japan. So our boy does too. Also, we uncover the mystery of this supernatural crystal resource, Amrita, which is being exploited to win wars. Yeah, okay, war is actually pretty serious and compelling without the fantastical junk. Magic aside, William is a real historical figure who became one of the first Western samurai alongside his second mate, Jan Houston, who doesn't appear in the plot. Over several missions, you'll dig deeper into a facsimile of the Tokugawa shogunate's struggles in search of your quarry, Edward Kelly, occasionally assisted by historical ninja, Hattori Hanzo, and other spirit-slinging characters. It's fantastical Japanese history. It's fun. Shut up, me, have fun! You can look at Nioh as the team ninjification of the Souls concept. That might mean nothing to someone who's never really played a Team Ninja game or read as obvious, like, yeah, no shit. If Team Ninja made it, it's gonna be a team ninjification. But for those who know, you know. You know. Nioh doesn't play out like Dark Souls exactly. Instead of perpetually existing in an interconnected world, levels are individually selected, loaded into, and battled through until their conclusion in the boss room. That also means the challenge on offer tends to be cropped, intentional, specific, and more generally deadly than a given Souls area. It's not that Souls doesn't do intentional or specific challenges, just that the world is more lax. Ambient, a vibe, if you will, comparatively. Except for like DS2, I guess. A Nioh level can account for where players are approaching from, what order they'll experience the stage in, really dig in to how to give the player the biggest titty twister possible. In the past, I might have called that miserable and outright unfun, but having stared blankly at the design of so many games, I can appreciate that it's selling a tight and particular experience. And it's not actually all that restrictive. You can approach Nioh in many ways.
He's burning in the fire. Oh my god. Can I trick him to die this way? I'm clipping this for you too. Hey audience, how's it going? Check this out though.
The levels have a few ins and outs apiece, ladders to drop and paths to find, but mostly for the sake of retroactive convenience. They circumvent the action game, lockstep play expectation of room-by-room combat by seeding environments with treasure chests, loot piles basically, and Kodama, these little mascot shits. If you collect enough of them, you can activate various minor buffs for like gold experience and item drop rates, that sort of thing. But in a game this hard and even occasionally pretty, it feels good to do, like little hide-and-seek minigames injected into the regular play. So, absolute fundamentals. Unlike some other game series, Nioh focuses on a set of weapon types. Different katanas don't have different moves on them, okay? An axe is an axe. You're given a rack of options, just pick one. You've got a second weapon slot, so carry another for fun. I went with Odachis and dual swords, because I heard Odachis were busted, and I know dual swords are busted. You can slash with square or triangle, light and strong attacks respectively, dash with cross, guard with a bumper, shoot people with the triggers. It's pretty tight all around, except your weapon's a little more complex than it looks. Nioh's main weapon gimmick is stance swapping. You've got high, medium, and low stances that completely warp your moveset. Some weapons are better at low stance spam, some weapons really genuinely incentivize creative, engaged play, swapping between all three, but regardless of your approach, changing stances changes how William functions. In high stance, you get this big sloppy dodge roll which works, but totally sucks in a game where that. Medium stance buffs your guarding ability, and the dodge is okay. Light stance gives you a broken dodge that hard counters most bosses in general, but then you've got to mind your timing. The goal of combat is twofold, and keep in mind this was released before Sekiro. You need to drain the enemy's key bar, basically their posture bar, to leave them panting and vulnerable to a finishing strike. It's not always lethal. This isn't Sekiro, but it gives you a little mini-game to pursue mid-battle. You could simply carve up whatever enemy or overwhelm them with skills, or you could target their key and wear them out. Nioh presents choice in just about every facet of play, allowing for emergent play patterns, a personalized experience. One other fundamental, you're intended to preserve ki, your stamina bar, by exerting yourself with intention, but you can tap a button as an attack ends to ki pulse, recovering some ki and dispelling any yokai realm spots. It's a cool concept. Maintain poise with skill and passively reclaim corruption by fighting through it and channeling your inner strength. Badass, but it's not super relevant unless you're in exceptionally cramped quarters or some boss is absolutely gushing yokai realm patches. It's just another plate to spin, but it's a nice little reward feedback loop built into regular play, kind of like how excising demons that emerge from these spots never respond the way regular enemies do. Nioh's good at keeping the dopamine flowing, until you hit a wall. Anyhow, this level of nerdy, considered mechanical stuff that's basically mandatory around the game's midpoint puts Nioh well above its contemporaries for actual mechanical complexity. Your fingers need to tap dance on that pad. I don't want to ever hear about how hard Demon Souls is. It just ain't. Not now. Not after this. The good news is, most of the really heady stuff doesn't actually matter, at least on first pass. Take leveling. It's standard for this type of game. Stock up every dash of Amrita, or experience that you can from the levels, spend it to increase your stats one by one. It's a wide spread that might confuse inexperienced players. People like whining about every unique weapon being tied to an individual stat, meaning your precious damage stat points could end up in a weapon you end up souring on, or they're spread too thin. But being real with you, you can absolutely go through the base game using whatever the best weapon you pick up is, level over level, regardless of if you're used to it. You can mostly ignore the damage stats and buff the fundamentals: health, carry capacity, and ki for dashing, better equipment, and action parity. But the reason people like to complain about the game bearing you with mechanics is, frankly, it's easier to blame the game and its head-ass systems instead of yourself for dying. Basically every boss folds to low stance dash behind attack, as long as you're ducking their moves with the dash. So to set the record straight, you don't need to sweat the weapon familiarity bar, or equipment bonuses, or which guardian spirit you chose, or ninjutsu, or onmyo magic, or even skills. They're all just additional knobs to tweak on your path to greatness. I'm not even kidding. Absolutely none of that would have made this homing half-health butt slam that much easier to consistently dodge. Fundies are everything. The rest is your post-game. How about using those fundies, though? Enemies come in some shapes.
What? He's disgusting! What the fuck?
One of Nioh's most glaring issues is enemy variety. The few you encounter are cool the first few times, but mostly get reskinned or embiggened throughout. It's a new IP coming from a failed first development cycle. I think we can cut them some slack. In general, you'll fight humans and yokai. I love the human enemies. They do a fantastic job of acting as a little break from harder challenges, are exceptionally threatening in packs because they're about as fast as you are, and do most of the same things you do. Fighting other warriors turns Nioh into a samurai flick, and that's really special to experience. Everyone should know the joy of being a hulking albino freak armed to the teeth with steel and spirits, casually slaughtering poor militiamen. Wait, what? I think Souls-like gameplay serves the samurai flick concept well, every fight coming down to split-second choices and deadly strikes. Yokai, conversely, turn the game into a conventional Souls experience, memorizing patterns and punishing accordingly. Many have exploitable weak points: the head, an eyeball, a crystal on the back, and so every monster is flavored just differently enough that the flow of combat is almost never truly stale, even if half these enemies are basically Legend of Zelda.
Wow, an eyeball weakness? How original. With
so many options and combinations available to the developers, they can keep encounters tweaked room by room. Tighten and loosen the pressure valve, create a narrative in play. You'll blast through huge sections only to run into the room from hell, and yeah, it sucks and creates a bumpy experience, but goddamn if they didn't put it smack in the middle. So it's you or me, game. What's it gonna be? That said, if you are running into trouble, you're still playing a Souls-esque game. You have the RPG systems to fall back on. Leave the level behind, grind out some side missions, level up, read a build guide online, try new weapons, try new guardian spirits that'll buff you in different ways, train at the dojo and unlock new skills to fill out your moveset, farm loot. You can overcome. It's just a matter of effort. Frankly, Nioh's masterful at narrative work in that regard. And let's just set all that aside, because more than simple systemic or design choices, we've got to talk about tone. DJ, real quick, spin something schnasty. That was 80! That was 80! The floor falls out from under you. Traps litter multiple levels. Bats fly out from tunnels ready to send you shrieking to your death in the second level. Ambushing enemies lurk around corners, behind boxes. Boulders will flatten you if you're not paying attention. The roof can fall on you in some places. Plenty of enemies have totally ambiguous combo strings that just have to be reacted to. I reject the idea that Dark Souls ever approached the shit-eating obnoxitude of Nioh's level-over-level design. It's sick. Sick like ill. The devs created this little genre label, Masocore, which I haven't seen used much at all because it sucks. But in case anyone was unclear about the intentions backing these moments, they're there, and consistently pop up level over level. If you think I'm exaggerating, f you. I think regular viewers expect me to do the funny scream and cry about how I wasted about 10 minutes of my life getting blown up every other level. And it's tough as a reviewer because I can see both sides here, but they're important for discussion, so let's walk through them. On one hand, hardcore action fans and solo game dev types, no offense, will probably tell me, and I know because I read Twitter, that none of these things matter because they're smoothed out with experience. If you play the game more than once, none of these really bother you again. They're mostly immediately reactable minus a few. Fucking spider. And annoying little spikes in the run really only add texture to an experience that might otherwise be too smooth and thus forgettable. And I'm never forgetting the spider, so. On the other hand, I've heard from people who work adjacent to AAA devs that a person casually playing a game might never turn it back on again after, say, 5 annoying deaths, or rather that each perceived annoyance cuts player retention by 1% every time it happens. Most video game consumers have a tenuous relationship with what they buy. Most players statistically don't ever beat games. If the goal is to have people see the credits and make the storytellers and narrative designers and frankly everyone on the development staff's time worthwhile, it's important that people actually play till the credits roll, or at least play through a chunk of the game, unless the team is appealing to a niche base and would rather filter more casual players out specifically to cater to a hardened, dedicated audience. This stuff is complex and intersects with marketing, the purpose of creating art at all, with creating a product under market conditions, lots of factors. It's not simple. What we do know is Nioh isn't often completed by people, far less so than other games, and it has some strong fans, like any media. Nioh 1 did not achieve the heights of its sequel, and many of these Masocore moments were outwardly toned down in the sequel. Spiders deal far less damage, for example. I think it's totally reasonable to think these little f***s to the player are tacky and obnoxious the way Pikmin 2 dropping bomb spiders on a full army is obnoxious. Yeah, in Pikmin 2 you can reset. Yeah, in Nioh you can run back to your corpse. But not a second of it was particularly enjoyable, just memorable. Good if you make videos so you can do the funny scream.
Oh, give me a break!
It's also perfectly reasonable to say, well, that's my art and it was funny. Filtering people is sick. Get pranked, dumbass. And that's why I scream in videos. Loot is an important mention, especially if we're talking creative integrity. Unlike other Souls-style games, most of your stats come from your gear. It's not all important on that first run, but you should generally be keeping up in item level as you progress, and paying attention to your weight capacity so your dodge roll isn't nerfed into the ground. You can fall behind with the game otherwise, so it's necessary to scavenge what you can, and that's great. From a gameplay perspective, it means desperate newcomers will scour every inch of the level. It's also maybe accidentally brilliant. I love the narrative implications of a foreigner wandering into war-torn Japan and making use of whatever he can find. Ah, what's up, fellow pilgrim? Oh, what the fuck? Physically being made to adapt to his new surroundings and integrate with the world. Awesome. I only pause because loot... Look, I can respect loot conceptually to a point. I acknowledge that it's fun to hit enemies until they explode with shiny shit like overstuffed piñatas. But I also know, that game devs know, that loot is incredibly addictive for some strata of the player base and even brickwalling to others who can't stand to parse it all, OCD or hoarder types or whatever. Functionally, you can collect everything and grind it up into experience points, which I love. But some poor sap is out there desperately reading everything and ignoring the gameplay because the difficulty and the sheer loot volume have effectively communicated that loot really matters, even if a lot of it really doesn't. Souls games are compelling without it, but do have narrative incentive to use a loot system. A player sifting through a dilapidated world in search of power, and yet they keep things cropped, so every weapon and every piece is an artifact or a relic, and I respect that immensely. It's odd to me that the Ninja Gaiden people thought to follow up one of the greatest action franchises ever made with something more concerned, frankly, with minutia, nerdy number-crunching horseshit, and busy work. Still, it's a matter of perspective, and y'all crow-type individuals can enjoy your trinkets or whatever. Just remember that all that glitters is not gold, motherfucker. Bosses. The flavor of the game. The heart, the soul, the words I didn't think of, You fill in the blank, go ahead. Nioh's got bosses. Like a lot of them, and they're really annoying. More than most Souls titles, but let's be realistic. If you want to be serious, you need to acknowledge that in Nioh, you die in 2 to 3 hits most of the time. That means if this hits you twice, you die. This is not Dark Souls, and this is not Bloodborne. This is hell. I don't see the need to dig into every single boss, so let's talk broad strokes. You're handed a lot of different weapons with a lot of different optional skills and stance capabilities. You can spec into magic or ninjutsu if you really want to, and like any Souls-type experience, plenty of items exist to smooth out play. If you're having trouble with any boss in the game, any at all, it's because you haven't exhausted your options, haven't leveled or geared up enough, or aren't minding your fundamentals. It was a nightmare jumping in and struggling through fights because I underestimated the boss, or didn't use the right stances. Early, I'd stick in high stance for too long and have a worse dodge roll as a result, capping my potential, and didn't make enough use of mid stance, limiting my ability to block. Not every weapon blocks well or punishes well after blocking in mid stance. Most weapons can cheese most bosses with quick and precise dashes in low stance, something I did for most of the game once it clicked. A lot of the bosses make use of attacks that, on paper, are unfair, often incredibly hard to react to and incredibly punishing to get hit by. The Yukiona's dash, the Hag's slam with its homing missile tracking, confusing timing, and meaty active frames. The first boss's little spin around, you're made to master every boss's moveset to something like 75% accuracy. You need to be reacting consistently because your damage often isn't high enough to accidentally steamroll whatever boss before they get you 2 or 3 times. I can appreciate the level of challenge now that I'm past so many difficult games. Action game fans get it. Just because an attack is unfair doesn't make it inherently bad. And maybe those are the ways devs level the gap between the player's options and the boss's limited move pool. All told, I was satisfied by the experience, absolutely hated half of the bosses, and would never make something so annoying to deal with myself. And that's why I'm in the critic chair. I hate that I had to waste time getting the Hag's slam timing down just right, and that was the last piece of the puzzle gating my progress in that fight. I regret that so much time went down performing repetitive tasks I basically got, but couldn't perform to, 75% accuracy or whatever for a couple hours at a time. Nioh is obscene and shouldn't be anywhere near the early game. The second you fish out that punishing its lightning attack is the trick, it can't ever beat you. Umibozu can go evaporate, man. What a stupid fight. I mentioned that many of the early bosses are considered some of the hardest in the game, but honestly, it's because there's nothing about them that's remotely smooth. They expect you to get that mid-stance guard is strong, low-stance dash is the way in the light, all within the first 3 hours. Many of the later bosses either fall off completely or can be cheesed with simple kiting, if they're humanoid, or else kill you in a single hit. It's rough. A bumpy progression. But then, maybe the game really is just about fundamentals, and the rest really is dressing. Maybe I suffered so much early game because I didn't get it. I don't think you should bump players early, but I can get behind a fair warning, a little filtering, for the sake of your work. It's also an open enough system that you'll see wildly different boss difficulty tier lists all over the internet, and a lot of that is reflective of chosen playstyle and player idiosyncrasies. Nobunaga was a total pushover compared to some of the early fights, and yet he's at the top of several players' personal tier lists. I guess I'll give it props for pushing me to the limit and making me think about my own lacking game plan. Now match me in SF6, Nioh devs. Let's go! I'm not huge on Nioh 1, and would probably return to Nioh 2 every time, but I don't want to leave people with the impression that it's horrible, irredeemable, cringe, whatever. Nioh is fun and interesting, but it takes a while to see the vision. When you start on the beach, freshly baptized in seawater, you are, in that moment, a drenched kitten. You're gonna get smacked, stomped, bamboozled, duped, defrauded, deceived. You are gonna die. And that entire play pattern of try and die is stamped and molded across at least the first 6 levels. They're all miserable. Nothing about them is particularly compelling. And the bosses are either hard, confusing, or you're still learning, so you get wrecked. Some of the hardest challenges are thrown at the player right off the hop. Why? Team Ninja, why? I was well over halfway done with the game when it finally clicked and I thought, okay, this is awesome. But since I was tired, annoyed, and had turned off my recording at that point, I can't even show you the moment that sold me on the game. The thing with Nioh is, you can get there, like break through the dirt and strike something pure and beautiful, a glimmering diamond at the heart of the experience, like Minecraft, but it's genuinely hard to reach. And so Nioh is doomed to be misunderstood and underenjoyed because, frankly, Nioh isn't interested in meaningfully onboarding players. It wants you to suffer and get mad and potentially post a lot about it on social media. For all its cutesy, mascot-esque Kodama, all of its cool guardian spirits, and all of its beautifully animated skills and multiple playstyle opportunities, Nioh is best remembered as, honestly, just play 2. At the same time, because it's so ridiculous to get a handle on, the second you do, or experience something cool or funny, it's suddenly very appealing. Nioh feels like a game that cynically made use of cutesy elements, gambling addict exploiting loot, and cringy dick punch design to draw a crowd, but managed to endear players by tripping over its dick, and sometimes being funny or cool. I want to take a minute to discuss aesthetics in Nioh, how they're used and the effects they elicit. I'm playing the remastered PC edition at 60 FPS, and sure enough, the original release allowed players to choose between consistent 60 FPS or 30 with anti-aliasing or edge smoothing, meaning you'd be choosing between raw performance and resolution. It's an interesting compromise because Nioh is a hardcore action game, much more difficult than something like Demon's Souls or most of Dark Souls in general. Reactions matter, so performance matters. On PC, the best of both worlds, its clean-cut presentation and HD graphics might give it a fairly sterile vibe, but so much of the world is a fantastical encapsulation of 1600s Japan that it's hard to find fault with the presentation. But the game is dark. Many levels are set at night, and this tends to put a damper on the actual environment and highlight both the player and the enemies. Williams animated beautifully, popping with particle effects, and enemies are glowing with dark energy or else glinting with steel. It's not the most beautiful version of the concept, but it's stark, a clean grid. The levels set in sunlight are harsh and glaring, often shadowed with trees and structures. I can appreciate the commitment to keeping the players centered and the enemies high contrast. Like I said, stark. The characters are pretty, Team Ninja, you know, beautiful dolls, and if not, they're hideous for the sake of comedy or villainy. It's excruciating. You just know if there were an overweight character, they'd talk like, "What does you want KBash does?" You know what? I'd love to see Team Ninja handle Hunchback of Notre Dame, forced to do something interesting with character design that isn't just the precursor to gacha-type aesthetic literalism. But whether accidentally or not, Nioh saves itself from total visual boredom with its own premise. Because it's a fictitious version of Japanese history, the world is infested with yokai, demons, and benevolent guardian spirits that tend to juice a character's appeal beyond the plain body, with colorful, iridescent, hovering animals. That's true of the enemy design as well. You'll fight samurai, ninja, bandits, you know, mostly regular people, but plenty of strange, disturbing, and visually bizarre yokai populate any given level, elevating the visuals with supernatural elements. And the levels themselves are very rarely magical, minus the few deeply demon-corrupted spaces, so yokai are cast as even more alien than they might otherwise be purely by contrast, unable to fit into the environment even through something as simple as color. As I write this out, I'm more hyped by Nioh's visual design because it seems intricately planned and incredibly intelligent. The story hits similar notes. In my original look at the game, I ignorantly mocked the story for its presentation, how it text dumps before the mission and fails to deliver contextualized cutscenes. This total non-attempt to onboard and strange characters. But once again, I'm thinking that someone tripped on their dick into success, or I've got to start giving people credit for their work. That's like not even half as fun. Nioh is, unfortunately, about some white dude rolling into Japan, solving many of the country's existential woes, nigh single-handedly, with help sometimes, and at worst, sidles up to white savior and Orientalist vibes, but, critically, does not exist for the benefit of the player. Or the Western player, anyway. The characters speak in their native tongue, and only other Westerners speak English, minus, like, Hanzo here.
Hunting a person down in a strange land will not be easy.
William actually does very little in the plot that isn't explicitly seen in gameplay. He is not often the major actor in any given cutscene, instead being chaperoned by Hanzo or his guardian spirit pal Nekomata. The plot still loosely follows Japanese history relating to the Tokugawa shogunate and its attempt to unite Japan, and does not make significant attempts to contextualize or explain the characters, landmarks, or even events unless you go digging. It makes the protagonist a tool of great leaders, casts the villain as an invading outsider, and the MacGuffin, the Amrita, as both supernatural and ultimately responsible for the conflict. It approaches outsiders in Japan in a fairly neutral way, doesn't inherently lionize William as much as the player, doesn't compromise the culture for the benefit of the Western player with something like an English dub or overt exposition, because most Japanese players will know this history already, and maintains the colorful, inspired supernatural elements, even demonstrates that they're not inherently evil. I'd say it's more sensitive to the issues certain culture critics might have with its framing. Is that yellowface, bro? Get the fuck out of here, bro! Not that the story is notable or enrapturing. If anything, we're really never given enough of William to feel strongly about the character, unless he's fighting for his life, and even sometimes then, he's a stone. You're a strange man in a strange land, and it's gonna let you simmer in that confusion. Though I do think it should be a criminal offense to give a guy basically white hair and a sword and make his personality white bread. Or cardboard. Or communion wafers. The actual plot of Nioh is at least a little more interesting than something like Samurai Warriors and its ilk, despite tapping into the same source material, Warring States period Japan. We're fed a tale that's got almost nothing to do with William except that he's hunting the villain, Edward Kelly, who's working against Ieyasu Tokugawa and his bid for power consolidation in Japan by resurrecting famous warriors and warlords of the past, up to and including Oda Nobunaga, which is actually really cool if you're into the history. Like really, how would Ieyasu handle his old lord and other revenants suddenly rising to oppose him from beyond the grave? It plays with the already legendary history informing the work by elevating it to truly mythic status. Otherwise, if you don't know much and don't pay attention, it's totally opaque and involves a lot of historical figure murder. So it's entertaining to watch at least. At some point, you'll have suffered through the hardest challenges, climbed to terrible heights, joined forces with powerful allies, crossed swords with Oda Nobunaga himself, and even slain the legendary Yamato no Orochi. Only the game doesn't stop there. William heads back to England after handling his personal business and faking his own death to ensure his benefactor, Ieyasu, doesn't assassinate him? Jesus. Back at the starting area, you fight through the actual hardest room in the game. Seriously, fuck you, Nioh! And deal with the real villain, an Englishman named John Dee, who's at the head of England's imperialist project and noted Amrita hoarder. I'm giving the game props for saying British imperialism for real. But Nioh isn't satisfied with a simple conclusion after approximately 40-60 hours, give or take. The internet said, hey, you want to play Nioh again? And I said, Nioh. There's DLC to beat, but not right away. It's tuned, at least to my experience, to a player who's completed at least some of New Game Plus. Don't ever tell me I don't bust my ass for this show. The DLC, all 3 chapters, explore revolutionarily annoying vectors in Nioh level and encounter design. You are gonna die a non-trivial number of times, if not to the levels, then to the bosses, which are just as frustrating. They're nothing particularly new stacked against the base game's content, they're just that tight and deadly. Nioh boss design has a cap that can only scale with player brokenness because its base experience is already selling 2-shots and 1-shots. Part of me wants to avoid discussing the DLC at all. It's that frustrating. The visuals you're looking at are clean, beautiful, evocative. It's a pretty game. And the devs know how to craft paintings in frames. It's great. It's so chewy and coarse to actually play through, I can't really recommend it unless you're one of those Nioh nerds who sucked up the main game, got super nerdy with equipment, visiting the forge, min-maxing, character building, etc., and you're not already playing Nioh 2. because otherwise it's a bit of a slog. I think it's kind of funny, at least, narratively, crafting such a difficult game for our protag to battle through, encouraging mastery through repetition and engagement, having our boy leave the country, and the second he walks back, bam! Stat wall. And that's what you get for jamming beans and toast. Well, go slurp some salad cream, you lime-licking spotted dick! Nioh 2 whips so hard, dude. What a f***ing run. Every front expanded or improved. Every slash felt. Free from the shackles of its original concept, Nioh 2 takes us back to the rise of Oda Nobunaga and, therefore, his friend and successor Hideyoshi, reimagining history such that Hideyoshi, originally named Tokichiro, worked alongside mute player character given the name Hide by our boys, so the names were combined as their exploits were jointly recognized in the grand campaign for unification of Japan under Nobunaga. Insane premise. Unhinged weirdo idea. Way more interesting than Quiet Guy Goes to Japan. Nioh 2 has different priorities, all seemingly responding to feedback from the first. You can create your character, be as horrific, disgusting, or lore-friendly as possible. You're basically a Japanese peasant with some yokai blood, but Team Ninja ain't gonna gatekeep what that looks like. You can pick your weapon with all new additions, like Twin Hatchet. Yeah, a very Bloodborne-esque folding weapon, a split staff, fists. Already winning, guys. I'm sold. You have guardian spirits like before, but this time you can transform into a yokai version of yourself with 3 potential different forms based on your guardian spirit, brute, feral, and phantom respectively, roughly corresponding to power, speed, and ranged combat archetypes, and best of all, you can color your yokai form and change the visuals. Demi-human OC creator? Zong? Systemic proliferation's the name of the game, but let's look at basics. The world is just about the same as before, still feudal Japan, but you fight through so many more well-lit and daytime levels. There's a greater emphasis on visual variance, so while you'll still spend plenty of time in grand estates, quaint backwaters, peaceful woods, and striking battlefields, you'll also trek through deeply corrupted spaces, winter levels, all kinds of visual feasts. Lightening up is a good idea anyway. Nioh 1's aesthetic is solid, but far more gloomy, less enjoyable to be around for long periods of time in my mind. Nioh 2 is bursting with hope, something that tonally underpins the narrative, Hideyoshi's rise to power. The narrative is also about a pair of nobodies, Hideyoshi, historically a bottom-rung dude, rising to prominence with Nobunaga, something very rare for its time, and that ludonarrative harmony of cracked RPG systems, like grappling with anything and everything for the sake of power, victory, and advancement, works perfectly, building on the already quality narrative work from the first. So how cracked is Nioh 2? In the original game, you could fight the ghosts of dead players if you were online, and now you can summon allies from blue graves like its souls, inherently curbing the surreal level of challenge for a frustrated player. Unfortunately, it will not carry you as hard as Dark Souls. You can buy medicine and other important items from the Kodama Bazaar, so you never need to be without a full stock of consumables. The game is hard, arguably harder than the first, but the run tends to be much smoother, because you can fairly wade into it more regularly. The yokai form replaces the spirit weapon power-up from the first title, and it's worse and better. In Nioh 1, you popped your spirit weapon, made it into a giant club, and clobbered bosses to death like baby seals at around a quarter health remaining. But in 2, the forms aren't as immediately busted. You've got to level them up with the skill menu, probably experiment to see which one you like best, and master the parry windows of each. Brute form is like a preemptive strike. If an enemy glows red, you stuff the attack on reaction. Really fun move. Feral form is a dash parry that requires an aggressive interception, which is fun to play with and very effective against some bosses. Phantom form has the traditionally expected sort of parry. Wait till the right moment and pop a counter. Each of these work better on different bosses, but none are a universal answer. But Guardian Spirits go deeper. You get benefits for having them equipped, of course, but now you can have 2 equipped, and each can be further attuned with the souls of defeated enemies that unlock monster moves. Some of these are seriously helpful, like save your ass from danger or completely destroy the enemy's key meter, good. and I really appreciate all this. It's like Team Ninja saw me complaining and sent my ass to customer support. Okay, sir, have you tried other weapons? Have you tried the other yokai forms? Have you tried uninstalling? There's so much to tweak, so much to personalize, and compounding with the pre-existing loot, forge, and character building systems now revamped for a deeper experience, Nioh 2 is basically the ultimate character building action game. Even better, now there's 2 Kodama types. Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Nioh 2 is more complex, but also more rewarding. You won't be strictly punished for not engaging with its systems. You can still play fundies only, but they're all smoothing options you'll be incentivized to at least toy with to make things easier. And why wouldn't you want to play with new weapons, big stompy monster moves, yokai transformations? Finally, I can have blue hair and pronouns! It's candy, dude. I really can't speak highly enough. We're looking at an absolute acknowledgement of what's fun about games, taking a sniper rifle to the absolute most hardcore game enjoyers and sending them to meet God. And the God is Nioh. I think complexity can be frustrating as well, but like I said, you'll want to screw around, play with the junk you're given. I don't want to only talk systemic fluff. One thing I didn't touch on regarding the original game was level design in combat. Similar to most other Souls titles, Nioh and its sequel aren't designed to be run through in a perfect linear path, level over level. You have the option to double back or run through at any time, though you're discouraged from running through if you want Amrita or loot, which can become Amrita. It's very advantageous to engage with everything because the grind is immense, but Nioh makes engaging fun. The verticality of several levels is accounted for, allowing stealthy strikes, ambushes, actual drop attacks. You can outrun an enemy by running up a cliff and dive bomb them later once they've dropped aggro, or snipe them. You have so many routes of attack, further compounded by things like back attacks if you spec into ninjutsu. And since 2 is a little more interested in letting you freely move or pick your path, I think it highlights the joys of the play and playpen level design best. That said, yokai enemies can't easily or equally be crumpled by gunfire or back attacked like humans, and that's an interesting edge to walk. Human-infested zones were always breaths of fresh air, dramatic and interesting. Encounters that felt like a clash of system mechanics and wit. And murdering peasants. Conversely, yokai fights were almost always duels I was forced to engage with in a specific way. And while it's kind of sad to lose the joy of regular human combat against yokai, Nioh's sending a clear message that these things are distinct and need to be handled differently, once again demonstrating narrative competence by delineating the natural and supernatural, and challenging the player to adapt to them on their own terms. It's like ranking up in an online fighter. At first it's all memes, tricks, and bullshit, but then suddenly you're facing down someone with a higher rank and it's cut the shit or die. Oh, come on. That was dirty. More than just narratively satisfying, though. Nioh's mechanics are intuitive and engaging. One thing I'm starting to see in Nioh, as opposed to Dark Souls, is clear visual communication and clear mechanical codification of the game's own internal reality. I think Dark Souls is more concerned with presenting the world first, right? Conveying tone in every aspect. Hence the relatively uncluttered HUD, the way the player character moves almost heavily with momentum, the relative inability to start and stop on a dime. When you fall off something in Dark Souls, you just fall. Compare with Nioh. HUD elements drowning the screen, player character stiff but precise to control. Great for understanding your dodge better. Visual indicators for so many attacks beyond the often muddy tells of the Souls games, and especially with its giant enemies. When you get knocked to the tip of a ledge by an enemy, you enter a falling animation that you can recover out of unless you're hit again, instead of simply falling, presenting an agency-retaining microgame during play. Nioh is a game where splashing yourself with water makes you immune to fire for a short time, and rolling can douse the on-fire ailment. Nioh is satisfying to play because it gives you all of the information you need to succeed, served alongside a tight and unrelenting series of challenges. Its mechanics are gamey first, but intuitive. It doesn't bother masquerading as hyper-realistic. It's profoundly mechanical, beautiful like the inside of a clock. I think that's what makes me unsure about the stories of the Nioh games. It's weird to walk into what's presented as at least somewhat grounded, minus the magic, having just waltzed through the video game dimension for about an hour before hitting any given cutscene. Okay, never mind, the tone is perfect. This is a personal matter, but what is up with the loading into a level and respawning soundbite? The like... Okay, that's a sound when you walk in and see like a decapitated puppet on the ground. That's where that soundbite goes. Nioh 2 also addresses the original in various ways. Levels are crafted just about the same, maybe a little more intricately with different paths to choose at any given point, but all told, similar. Even the death traps and tricks from the first. Oh, Nioh 2 retains the dumb crap, but tones down the severity of the punishment. Spiders just aren't gonna kill you as hard. You're usually given time to react. It's really rare you die just because the devs thought it'd be funny.
Oh, sweetie, you only got corner health.
Usually it's because of the boss bullshit.
So this guy is arguably one of the most bullshit fights in the whole game.
That was the official Fextra Life video guide, in case you were wondering, and the kindness is appreciated. Cut that? You stick an 80-hour game in someone's face. Might as well let them play it, you know? Honestly, I'm just gonna use it as evidence that the original was overtuned and overly annoying, and it wasn't working with players writ large. And you can't stop me. There's an absolute plethora of new enemy types with new movesets to contend with, vastly increasing the number of potential combinations and flavors of battle, and all just as horrifying.
Oh, God! Stop.
Just directly responded to criticism with a flawless solution. Choice is integral to Nioh. Souls games in general, crafting your own success is rewarding. But Nioh 2 takes it a step further with genuinely optional content in every level. Wait, what is that?
This dark dimension we're in is known as the Shadow Realm.
These Yokai Realm segments exist, which hinder your ability to regenerate ki, so playing through them is slower, more methodical, and potentially dangerous, but completing them gives decent loot, and if you can't use the loot yourself, as always, you can grind it down into experience points. Even side missions are expanded in scope and rewards. I'm amazed at the sheer volume of stuff you can pack into a quality set of systems, how finding the formula can result in a near-infinite game. With so much to choose, so much to do, you can burn up weeks with this thing, and that's my only real negative feeling about Nioh 2. At one point you can fight basically Ryu Hayabusa from Ninja Gaiden. It's a tough fight, enough that I had to reconsider my whole strategy and go for what I look at as a cheese strat, functionally ignoring fundamentals, the concept of punish windows, even engaging with any sort of normalcy. So the boss could walk into a weird sheathed stance charge move because it just wasn't programmed to deal with it well. And at that point you realize, at like 2 AM on a Sunday, that you're killing an avatar of one of the greatest action series ever created with your stupid, gold-encrusted, magic buff-dripped, loot-embellished idiot strategy you greenlit with skill points, and that Ninja Gaiden probably isn't ever coming back. Because this high-fidelity, high-variance, system-addled, and genre-pilfering New Age Team Ninja title has better sales potential, more addictive gameplay, more gameplay. And your heart breaks a little. But see, then you get the Izuna drop skill for winning the fight and hit people with an Izuna drop! I should mention multiplayer. For as difficult as I'm making the game out to be, you can co-op with a friend through almost every mission on offer. Nioh 1 has multiplayer as well, but people have mostly moved on, so let me just line up a massive hearty fuck you to get good culture or whatever. The whole you didn't beat it if you didn't solo it mindset you see across the online soul sphere. Nioh 2 with a friend sounds like the best gaming night I'd have all year. It's such a fun game, with so much on offer for player expression, with so many intricate and interesting levels and encounters that co-op could only improve the experience. Just picture your friend chucking hand axes from the rear while you pin down the enemy with your weapon of choice, nearly being overwhelmed, but your friend fires off a headshot on an attacker or gets a clutch save. It's such a fertile ground for joy, but here I am, alone, because I gotta show everyone that I can mostly solo the experience. Like playing Nioh okay could ever matter slightly on a resume. I hate every single one of those people with every fiber of my being. Oh, and boss difficulty is pretty significant. Very important point. For all the fun on offer, all the knobs you can tweak, Nioh 2 is very concerned with the low stance supremacy of the original game. And sure, maybe that wasn't your experience with the first, but it was mine. I stuck with low stance back attacks for most of the run because it worked. consistently. Nioh 2 doesn't roll over so easily. That systemic proliferation offered to the player is directly countered by deranged, unhinged, sick, ill, demented, vile, craven, cruel, and generally convoluted battles against these absolute movesets, these walking ability dispensaries. They're Mario! Now, mid-stance is great because learning a boss requires blocking and the dash is basically fine, and low stance is only maximally useful when unbelievably fast attacks are rushing at you 24/7. But there's a broader push across the various bosses to allow for player reactions. Enenra is an infamous player filter early on, mostly because the sheer level of variance in his attacks makes him a hard knowledge check, but his projectile can be guarded, his combos sidestepped. His most obnoxious attack is his transformation AoE, triggered by draining his ki, which you'll naturally do by attacking. So it's not trying to punish you, but teach you to be mindful of your damage and how bosses react to being overtly pressured. Many of the bosses are vastly more difficult because they vacillate between stages, normal and yokai realm mode. Every boss is a regular moveset, usually a fairly tame set of abilities, but can power up by plunging the area into the yokai realm, thereby reducing your own ki regeneration and buffing your own skills. These moments make the battles challenging, complicate fights massively, and you usually have to run through the yokai realm gauntlet multiple times per fight. It's daunting and oppressive with minimal break time. Sometimes they feel outright impossible, until you've watched someone else do it online and eventually grind it out. Take the snake boss sending out its appendages, so now you've got 3 bodies to contend with on reduced ki regen, so restricted sprinting, or the owl becoming practically invisible, and the off-screen orb launching projectiles. It gets hectic, kind of surreal actually, you're pushed to the limit. In so many of the yokai battles, I don't even think it's worth commentating each boss. Everyone's got some bullshit, and any of them could be your filter moment if you're burnt out. So take a breather, turn the game off, and come back the next day. It's great.
So, full disclosure, I did not beat every single optional boss in Nioh 2, but I mean, who's gonna care about that, right? I guess the neo-Nazis. That's not funny. It's like a real-ass, like a pressing social issue.
The human yokai distinction is still present. Human enemies may be loaded up with more guardian spirit-specific combat capabilities, but once the storm is past, you roll in and pummel. Literally. Like this one where I pummeled them, and this one where I pummeled them. All it takes is a simple key break and consistent offense. It's hard to get hyped about them because they're mostly all pushovers. Only the one DLC fight, with her obscenely tight move list and powerful demon summoning burst attacks, and generally Virgil-coded behavior, really lift her out of her human boss limitations. Man, this fight is cool. The yokai battles are all basically incredible, like either eye-catching, impressively animated, or tight and interesting to play through. Souls game difficulty has a somewhat finite cap. There's a point where a fight is too specific, too restrictive, where play patterns homogenize and all the creative character building is invalidated by raw frame data demands.
But what if I had some troublesome kitties?
But overall, Nioh 2's challenges, minus some really ridiculous ones, change the context of difficulty battle over battle. This one enemy's weak point changes throughout the fight, so you have to be mindful about your offense and defense with its widespread lightning ground coverage. Some of the only real offenders are the Toad with his generally annoying RNG abilities, so sometimes he'll make the fight impossible with status ailment spam, and other times it's a very standard fight, and various DLC bosses having overly tight dodge windows and insane damage. At least they're mostly visually stunning and varied. Not you, Umibozu 2! I love how Nioh presents leathery, scaly, alien demon aesthetics, and tacks on glowing elements and giant weapons, casting them as almost human, but twisted and magical. One thing this title does is grapple with the caster fight. Most Nioh battles are demons or warriors, so making a ranged magic user a boss could be a bit of a wrench in the system. Nioh 1's own Edward Kelly made use of tricky movements, but was otherwise fairly simple to handle and broadly melee. Nioh 2 turns the few casters into raw spectacle, giving them powerful, flashy spells to dodge. They're mostly bullyable like any human foe, but this one straight up denies your win and stands up again. It's nothing unheard of. Sekiro already happened, you know, but it got me panicking during a fight I thought I'd won. I don't actually have a lot of palpable tangible criticisms about the boss design. No, let me break down every boss and tell you how I think about it. They're all deranged. You still die in 2 hits. Did you miss the... That didn't change! I just like the game, and they're the challenges you're expected to test and sharpen your builds on. They taught me a lot about the system mechanics and pushed me to drop my build twice. I hate that, but I got a richer experience for it instead of some one-note, one-weapon run. System bloat can harm a game, naturally. I want to bring up Nights in the Nightmare real quick, because it's one of the greatest DS games ever made, but it's incredibly intricate, enough that I was learning fundamentals as late as the final boss. So guess what happened in Nioh 2? I had no idea you could hold the triangle button after yokai shifting to embiggen your weapon, like charge it up for temporarily buffed damage. I didn't realize yokai shifting near a key-depleted enemy would initiate a grapple. You can just miss things, and part of that is a function of how I run games, you know, to the point of mental exhaustion where I'm just not processing information. But there's so much. Learning that charge trick felt like what I imagine leveling down feels like. Like, wow, I could have done that all game. None of this is poorly explained textually, it's just not presented in a clear, concise way or tutorialized meaningfully. Like, if people are missing these things, it's an issue of conveyance, full stop, and you'd think the difficulty would get more people poring over every piece of tutorial text, but then you're out of the action. Like, empathize a little. When you're losing an online fighting game, do you watch your replays and take notes, or hit training mode? Right. No. Obviously, you cue another and smash your controller. I played around with my build more in 2 than the previous game, probably because I felt more confident in the systems, but also because I got walled a lot, and psychologically too. It may be that any weapon can handle any fight, but it didn't feel like that more than once, so I swapped twice during the run. At first I was on dual axes. They were fun. It was cool playing sorta guerrilla style, ambushing foes, comboing, and pulling back and chucking a hatchet. It's a neat, fairly involved pattern, but it's also fairly slow and methodical, so I tried on a pair of gauntlets and became a monk in half a second. Holy shit. Fists carried most of the game until I fought a certain boss I couldn't easily reach, and despite videos I've made, I'm not a big fan of big dumb axes, not the way I like the one-handed stuff, so I refused to compromise my strength build with the axe or otachi, because I did that already in 1, and hard swapped to solo katana and dual swords. And at no point did the game crumble. I just made use of new tools and adopted new moves. The hatchets of the early game required me to mind my range because those throw moves were integral to safely progressing through zones, but because of that they were a coward weapon and holding me back. When I swapped to fists, I was deeply entrenched in the experience, so getting up close wasn't as difficult, and the weapons had multiple moves to get in and get killing. Finding the reach lacking at a point, I swapped to the solo katana, which made much less use of quick positioning. It was more about raw fundamentals than super quick thinking or incredibly mindful play. It doesn't even need skills against several foes because simply punishing a whiffed combo from an enemy is consistent damage. The dual swords are cool. If you think otherwise, you're not being serious. Don't be foolish. The game drags on, offering mountains of side missions alongside the main set, but one notable point of interest for me is the story. I never really dug the first. I think it's serviceable, appropriate for the source material spun in the context of a video game, but it didn't really capture me. Nioh 2, on the other hand, full-on blindsided me with an interesting narrative. Nobunaga takes a bit of a back seat here, except for, you know. And the player character does too. You're mute. You don't get to really personably interact with the story, but it's sort of contextualized by having the player made part yokai, personality quirks, sure whatever. It's Hideyoshi who carries. This period of history is very thoroughly chronicled, represented, mythologized about. The rise of Oda Nobunaga is interesting, but Hideyoshi himself is one of the most compelling characters of the era. He was nobody, and his rise to power was meteoric. Cast in a video game, we get this humble imbecile with a little monkey spirit who acts like a monkey. It's ridiculous. Please don't ever do that again. But as you and your best pal progress, gain the power you sought, you watch someone you've come to view as a friend slowly lose himself. That's incredibly relatable. Like, this story, Nioh 2's story, shouldn't be anything. And it gets better. Knowing Japanese history, we can surmise that our boy eventually supersedes Nobunaga, and then we hit the moment where he turns his back on us. And at that point I thought, oh my god, This is Eric Sparrow. I'll kill him. It's weird to get invested in this kind of thing. The first kept the player at arm's length, but here, I mean, we're canon friends with Buddy. Voiceless, but profoundly stat and ability-riddled, our character speaks the only language he needs to. Now, this is something Tony Hawk's Underground could never do. Aside from obvious fantastical bits, the actual chronology isn't perfectly accurate to Japanese history, and a lot of it is just what-if fluff mixed with magical corrupting stunts. It's not insultingly bad, it's mostly fun, but imagine creating a personal player connection to the story in a game with a created character, when the first one barely aspired to it. Oh shit, I didn't mean it, bro. I didn't mean nothing by it, bro. Of course, you've settled the war in Japan by allying with Ieyasu and both putting down Hideyoshi, or Tokichiro, and a shadowy figure from the intro who stabbed your mom and failed to kill you, but that's besides the point. That's good. Do I always have to have a point about this stuff? Nioh 2's DLC is so f***ing obscene. Imagine crafting some of the most beautiful sights in any of these games, and loading them up with some of the most absurd, tightly designed encounters in any action game. Imagine dumping something similar to DMC's Bloody Palace as optional content so the really involved players get full-blown compulsive with the thing. The DLCs go further back in time than the base game, chronicling such events as The First Samurai, and really, I don't think people play Nioh because the story is engaging, but it's fun regardless to journey into increasingly fictionalized historical Japan for more gameplay. I hate that Nioh is so dense. I spent most of the video in total talking about the fundamental system stuff in the Nioh 1 segment. Really, I'd love to just gush about how much fun I had in 2. How incredible the animations are, how cool it feels to use the environment to your advantage in regular combat, how soundly that warrior vibe resonates. You can't play Samurai Warriors or even stuff like Onimusha and get anything even close to samurai gameplay. You can hardly get the showdown vibe in Ninja Gaiden, a game where most of those serious duel bosses boil down to guarding and lightly punishing before backing off. Nioh replicates so much trained swordsmanship, the natural fatigue of combat, battlefield scavenging and making use of what you have, fighting dirty, all set in a framework of incredible stakes. Get hit 2-3 times and you die. It's so intensely engaging, and in a way, other Souls-likes don't really capture. Sekiro is the closest, of course, with its posture bar and cinematic presentation, but the sheer video-ass games nature of Nioh make it an instant recommendation. Just not for, like, regular people. You can get your flash and your dopamine by the minute, but even the mundane experience is intense and open to creative, emergent play. Anyone who likes these kinds of games tends to like them for different reasons. You like the vibe, the character building, the lore, that sort of stuff. Nioh prioritizes mechanics. Many knobs, a deluge of numbers. It wants you theory crafting and optimizing. It doesn't care if you just want to look at the pretty countryside. It's going to make you work for your place in the world. It caps its own player base early by making it clear the experience won't compromise, but keeps the door cracked open, and especially in 2, allowing so many kinds of expression, just enough lubrication and summoning and consumable item stocking. I hated Nioh for a very long time, and it was only when I was more or less forced to sit down and take the experience in that I eventually got it. Part of me is mourning for Ninja Gaiden, but it's still there. And Nioh's got its own brand of psychotic action I'll never look at again as anything short of incredible. So play back the clip of where I stabbed myself, cause it didn't happen. We rewound the clock. KBash lives. KBash lives another day on this cursed earth. Hey, it's KBash. Huge thanks goes out to my $4 patrons. Check them out. Beautiful. And double special thanks goes to my extra generous patrons who are Adam Welch, Alpha 42, All Snaps, Arshwasser, Azura, Axinate, Audra, Bear Skeleton, Basement Dweller, Bosch 7, Bearkeeper, Easy Soul, Ben M, Beguile, Bing Bing Doodoo Oingo Boingo Time, Blake Against the Machine, Wargle Hargle, Bohop, Boom Dead, BH Operator, Brandon S, Brandon Hesse, Brios, Brianna Wu, British Gooch, Cal, Cakesar, Can I Cuss on Captain Here? Blasted, Captain Wade, C-Dub, Caesar T, Chiefy Boy, Hero, Corden, Chris Bromo, CLB 5000, Cody Golden, Comfy Moogle, Couch Moba, Crashgers, Crater, Chrono 19D, CW Glassworks, Priest, Cynical, Daddy Dagon, Dondium, Danny Lavelle, Denny Pangos, Dakota Storm Jones, Stag, Swaggy, David Castillo, Dara, Decode, Deadwood, Dennis Amaya, The Strega, Diablo, Dingusbat, Doug Prince, Dr. Cullen PhD, The Protagonist, Dylan Coffee, 8-Bit Elias, Elpio, Elsa, Emperor Pickle, Empty Tenshi, Eric Monticello, Aesthetico, Everstone Isle, Gnar, Fail Knight, Forte Noir, Fupa Saiyan, Frankenstitch, Frisky Nippler, Frog Vorbis, Gato Nero, Glyph Seeker, Nine Cat, Goose 6112, Gray, The Darkest Black, Corey, Gucci Plank, Asi Ibrahim Tanirga, Hatsune Miku's Crack House, Heeman, Game & Station, Hermit J, Hexmax, Honey Mutts, Horn Tiger, How do you know? Huey. I'm supporting KBash just because I wanted to make this part of the video longer. Ingenious Clown, I punched a sandwich, Irrational, Irradiated Cherries, Dice Kyle, It's not that. It's time to sue, It's not good, Ivy Ruth Langley, Jacob, James, Jason Lasky, Jaden, JL Savarus, J JK Hedgehog, John Bo the Joker, Joke Frog, Jordan Joyner, Jules DLC, Julian My Julian, Kaizetta Slow, KBash's Best K, Keegan Too Cool, Keith the Thief, Kata Snap, King Kuma, Keith, Kenite Pike, Clock, K-Noe, Kong 2020, Rating, Crazy Dark Chocolate, Kumi, Kais, Kyle, KZ Excellent, Lady Dentalian, Lady Weed, Latrix, Laundry Mom, Lego Sid, Lethal Nibbles, Little Big Trouble, Loathsome Dung Eater, Low Fat Moger, Lucas Boyd, Lucky McSmucky, Mac James, Lunatic, Lupin the Turd, Magic Meows, Magical Madman, Mama Rollin, Manapool, Mara Ganger, Marsmugio, Maximilian Wolfgang Niver, Maple Puppet, Metal Gear Gaseous, Michelle Citrano, Mike DeVere, Milky Moo Official, Mikusagi, Moa, Bobby Dobby, Big Titty Gok, GF Cooley, Monochrome Only, Morgana Black, Modi, Mr. Dodongo, Mr. Whiskey 282, Mr. Yeety Dabface McYoinkbomb, Nyranu, Nito Torpedo, Nico Puzzle Rat, Nifty Rex, Norian Daridius, Not Nobel, Nuggy, Old Burgle, Old Man Cranberry, Omega Fighter, Omni Nerd Zero, Only LK, The Plant, Pandemic Cowboy, Pinata, PBK, PK Gaming, Pontus Reddin, Popular Hitman, Potato Gaming HD, Prismatic Dan, Fractal and Pals, Project Darklight, Punch Fighter Champion, Quasar McDougal, Quillward, Quinn, Radpunk, Reasonable Willow, Reggie Rodriguez, Renteca Bond, Ricochet Framed Relay, Roy Londo, RP Gamer, Ryan Maury Brooks, Siren Smells Good, Salsa, Salty Smasher, Scribe Slendy, Say, Sakai no Award, Saphirium, Sexy Bionicle GF, Shot, Shinigami, Shintendo, Shut Up Wesley, Silver Bear 909, Singe, Sir Doodles a Lot, Soon. God! Sleepy Wabbit, Slick Tactics, Snart, Sock'em Bopper, Suckdolager, Space Lizard, Squidgid, Squishword, Standard Issue Dingus, Star Night Sky, Storm Strider and the House of Storm, Streetums, Sublime Cataclysm, Super Sandwich Guy, Harvold's Quest, George Chubbington, Terrence Swift, The Big Buddy, The Clown Prince of Cringe, The Digital Dutchman, The Good Lord has blessed me, hallelujah! The Green Loki, The Legendary Zoltan, The Peacemaker Pyro, The Salt Knight, The Real McCoy, Big Dick Mystic, Thresh, Rips Heart, Tiggles McGuffin, Tim Lobster, Timid the Writer, Turtle Play, Travis Edwards, Twiddle Chungus, Vid, Vacant Plaza, Valenrist, Venom, Vice Pop, Vic, Waposa, Weeb Trash, Waylon, Where Am I? Help! Widgie, Winter Solstice, Win TV, Renchim, Zanny Tanner, Yashichi, Yay Kundo, Your Mom, Winky Zachary Livesey, Zachary Zanasso, Zane the Impure, Zane the Pure, Zed Slayer Gamer, Zero Zalazar, Sylvan Ray, Zenova, Cyberbunk. If you'd like to help support the show, unlock new long-form projects, and help me keep improving, check out my Patreon. We got lots more videos in store. Stay tuned for more. KBash out.